You're listening to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast, a deep dive into Toho's rich history of monster films and discovering what lies beneath the surface. Whether you're a hardcore or casual fan, or somewhere in between, if you've ever thought there must be something more to these movies than people in rubber suits, then this show is for you. All right, well, switching things up here a little bit. Thanks for tuning in to the Kaiju Apostle Podcast. My name is David.
And I'm Chris.
See, I like not introducing you. That's nice.
It's nice.
So, but I would, actually, we haven't really had a chance to chat too much. How are you doing tonight, Chris?
Well, we're doing a much better movie, which it's kind of a bummer. Well, no, it's been seen.
Yes.
But no, this was I think it's nicer to be a little more cogent, a little more awake than we were last time too.
Yeah. Well, we also didn't sit through Rise of Skywalker either. So.
Well, yeah. Which was emotionally draining for a lot of reasons.
Very true.
Which, I don't know if we said this then, but Gamera was a nice change of pace, despite how, it wasn't a great movie, but it was a good palate cleanser for the evening, at least.
Yeah, it was a good way to just kind of, I didn't want to shut off my brain entirely, but then I'm like, oh, well, I guess we could have went to see this in theaters and have all these expectations and be super disappointed. So I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, well, 7 movies of brand new footage and then the next one being stock footage compared to 42 years of expectation.
Yeah. No, and that's actually, I was thinking about it. I was like, I wonder how an episode would have been if we would have recorded after the season finale for The Mandalorian.
Yeah, probably a lot more energetic, a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Better mood, that's for sure.
I wasn't even, I'm not joking when I text you, and I was like, I'm just sitting there after getting done with that episode and that last scene, and I'm like, this is Star Wars. This is awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of nice that with the Godzilla movies so far, we've been able to just watch them kind of in a row, pick and choose other franchises to watch in the meantime. But Mandalorian's here's a little treat for watching everything compared to, and I'm sure we'll get there with Godzilla a couple decades down the line, but especially Destroy All Monsters, King of the Monsters. I don't know. I'm kind of just listing, but
yeah, it is funny.
So,
oh, what?
I was just gonna say the Mandalorian style of thing. Here's enough for you to watch now, but here's enough for you if you've been consuming all of the material so far. Here's a little extra material. So
yeah,
that was very nice. I was very thankful for that.
I will say it's funny. I saw someone before, obviously we need to get into the movie, but I saw someone say something along the lines of I'm trying to think of just Dave Filoni, surprising everyone with the Darksaber reveal
spoilers.
And all that. Yeah, by that point, whatever. If you really, if that means anything to you, you probably have already watched the episode.
Yeah, that's very true.
I don't remember what it was. Just something along the lines of assuming that Jon Favreau had no idea what that was, and I'm like, he voiced a Mandalorian that held it. If anything, he probably was like, Dave, we should do this.
Yeah.
Dave, we should do this. And he's like, all right, fine, just leave me alone.
The dude's been in Clone Wars, Solo. He had a role in Mando already.
Yeah.
It probably in Rebels, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I don't think I like we were talking with soundtracks. I don't know if I notice voice actors unless it comes up on Twitter and someone tells me. Mm-hmm. So I could be very wrong. It's happened once before, but
yeah, I had no idea that was Jason Sudeikis in the beginning of that episode till someone mentioned
the most
something.
Hated man in the galaxy. Why bring back Sheev for episode 9 when he can bring back the scout trooper who punches Baby Yoda?
Right. Okay. So today's episode, kids, is 1963's Atragon. Now, I will say that this movie is not rated as highly on the internet as I expected. Now on Google, it says 94% of people like this movie. I have no idea 94% of what. IMDb is 6 out of 10. I don't think there's anything on Rotten Tomatoes there. But as we've all learned, those metrics are quite subjective. Who do you pull that information from? But, I can safely say that this has been, apart from Gojira's, this has been my favorite movie so far. Before I get into actually, let's get into the synopsis, then I'll give your initial thoughts after that. So when a subterranean nation is sick and tired of living under the sea, it's up to a retired Navy admiral and some of our favorite Toho actors to find a secret submarine that's being developed to save the world. Oh, and it can fly. Staff, directed by Ishiro Honda. Screenplay is by Shinichi Sekizawa. So this film was based on a story called The Undersea Warship, A Fantastic Tale of Island Adventures by Shunro Oshikawa. Produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, music by Akira Ifukube, and special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya. So obviously a lot of those names we've heard before. Mm-hmm. Cast, and this is probably the longest cast because there's been so many recognizable faces in this film. So I wanted to make sure to point everybody out. So we have Tadao Takashima. He plays Susumu Hatanaka. So he played Sakurai in King Kong vs. Godzilla. He was one of the guys who worked at the TV station. Yeah. Okay. And then his partner was also in that. I'm sure you recognized him. Yu Fujiki. He plays Yoshido Nishibe. He was Kinsaburo. He was the guy that got sick on the island. Yeah. And then we have Yoko Fujiyama. She plays Makoto Jinguji. And that's actually, the way that this film was, it was hard for me to pick up the pronunciation. So that's what we're going with is Jinguji. But she's in a film called Dogora, which I've still been trying to figure out if we're going to watch this on the podcast or not. But she also had a role in Akira Kurosawa's Redbeard. Then we have... I think it's Yun Tazaki, and if not, it's Jun Tazaki. Someone will correct me, I'm sure. He plays Hachiro Jinguji. So that was obviously the guy that we'll find that deserted. But he's probably one of my favorite actors in all of these films. He's a very iconic actor. It was actually rumored, and I think it's a baseless rumor, based off of a passing comment in the Shiro Honda biography, but the rumor was that Toshiro Mifune, who plays a lot of lead roles in Kurosawa's film, was going to have this role, but he was busy. I haven't found any evidence in that, but I could see the similarities there and just the caliber of acting. Then we have Ken Yuhara. He plays Admiral Kusumi. He was in Mothra, and he's in several other Toho films. Then we have Kenji Sahara, my favorite, as Uoto Uno. And then Hiroshi Koizumi as Detective Ido, which we've recognized him from Mothra and Matango. And then we have Akiko Harada as Mu Agent Number 23, which, it was a nice change of pace for him. He's been Dr. Serizawa, he's been all these different doctors, and also now he's this evil agent from the sea. So that was cool to see that shift. Then we have Yoshibumi Tajima. He plays Tome Amano. He's the guy that gets arrested for tailing Makoto. So his best role is, in my opinion, is we're going to see him next film in Mothra vs. Godzilla. And then we have Hideo Amamoto. He is the High Priest of Mu. He actually plays one of the Matango in the film Matango. And then he's also in a couple other films, All Monsters Attack, King Kong Escapes, and then one of my favorites, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. We have Tetsuko Kobayashi as the Mu Empress. Only thing I could really find that I recognized is that when the Thunderbirds TV show went to Japan, she did a voice for that.
Oh.
And then we have Hisaya Ito as Shindo. He was in Varan, one of the two students that dies in the beginning of the film, and he'll show up a little bit, right? And he shows up a little bit more in other films as well. But like I said, I mean, there's a lot of actors and actresses here that, you know, we've seen before, we'll keep seeing. I just feel like this was like an all-stars, you know, Toho film, in my opinion. There isn't a lot of context or trivia that I could find with this film, just because it's not nearly as popular as the other other kaiju films that we're discussing. Sure. But in 1995 and 1996, the film was adapted into an animated version. I don't know where to watch that, but I'd be very intrigued. And then the production time was actually incredibly short. Production started on September 5th, 1963, and it released December 22nd.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It doesn't seem that rushed.
And that's kind of my point, right? Is it's not rushed. Well, it was rushed, excuse me, but compared to some of the other films we've watched, I would say you couldn't tell. So coming into the film, as always, I love hearing your impressions before watching the film. So you look at the poster, maybe you do a little bit of research. What were your thoughts going into Atragon?
Well, this one, the only thing that I had seen was maybe the front cover to, like, yeah, I guess it was the poster. And I was like, okay, so there's a submarine, but I didn't really realize what that meant for the film. My first joke was that it was another Gamera anime that's probably one of the anime scenes. And I was like, okay, so I guess there's a submarine in here. Maybe we weren't sure what to advertise. But then watching and realizing how long it took for us to get to a real monster. Well, okay, there were real monsters beforehand. You know, wink, wink, metaphorically. But
there's always monsters in the banana stand.
Yeah. But yeah, this one definitely, I was loving how it kind of really brings a lot of the themes to Gojira, like, straight to the surface, pun intended. And I kind of was like sitting here like, wow, this one's not, I wouldn't use the word ham-fisted because that kind of has negative connotations, but it's easily the most in your face of any of the thematic ones. I mean, Gojira is too, but this one might as well have held a title card for you to watch what the themes were. And I love that. It was a change of pace from last week.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm going to keep bringing that up.
Yeah. No, so you say, you know, you're hesitant to say ham-fisted, but I'm going to keep the hand analogy. And it's just, it didn't pull any punches, right? No. I mean, whereas Gojira, you might argue, is more symbolic, right? I mean, there's definitely that. It's a monster film, but it's trying to convey a deeper, more meaningful message. This one's just like, nope, the war is over and we need to think about the world differently, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, let's be completely honest. This film is in our podcast schedule by semantics only. Like, this is a kaiju film because of like 2 minutes. And
yeah,
I don't want to say that's why it's my favorite, because obviously I love the monsters, I love the fights and all that. But this is, to me, I think, the best example of just showing that, like, yes, these monsters inhabit this world, but ultimately the film is about the humans. And so, yeah, I agree with you. It's a very, very direct film. Whereas Matango maybe was a passion project in the sense of he got Honda and everyone else got to be a little bit more creative than normal, like Honda and Kimura. This one I feel like was really like, you get the heart and soul of what not only Honda felt about pacifism, but as we're going to get into this, a lot of what Honda was haunted by serving in the war. So I'm going to preface something in that between the last episode and now, I did get a copy of the biography of Ishiro Honda, and I haven't quite got to the chapters where he's discussed Gojira, but getting up to that point, I mean, the work that Steve Rifle has done, I've interacted with him on Twitter about, just a few things here and there. And I say that just because it's encouraging when you actually read a book by an author and you can talk to them and they don't just like ignore you. That's awesome. And then I know the co-author is Ed, and I can't pronounce your last name. Someone's going to correct me about that too. But the point being is reading that book and getting history into his time in his military service, like this movie makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't have any of like the 63 context of Japan or Japanese culture, and the only familiarity I have with the cast is what I've seen, but it's very easy to read historical parallels and historical like allegory into this film, and not being totally sure if it's good or not, if it's like correct, but just thinking about we've talked about the pacifism before, and it's definitely coming back up in this episode, so I'm gonna gloss over it now, but not for the episode. But like thinking about the Mu Empire, like mailing them a package saying, here's a video, here's our video introduction, we're gonna rule the world, and it's just like, nah, we're not too concerned about it. And it's not until the Mu Empire attacks the UN sub that it's like, okay, now it's a concern. And now in 2019, as an American, I like look at that and I'm like, okay, is the UN a stand-in for the US back in the 40s, seeing what's going on with World War II, and it takes us being attacked directly before we get involved. And I'm not sure if that's like what they were going for in 63, but that's kind of how I was reading it now. So it's interesting to see the way that that meaning can evolve over time, but I guess maybe I can turn that over to you to say if that reading was correct or if I'm maybe reading too deep or...
So I'll confess, I didn't even make that connection. So I'm going to say that's pretty good. I mean, that is kind of the tough thing though, right? Is we sit here and we can not necessarily turn a blind eye to things happening, but it's when we allow like patriotism. Or I think Nathan Marchand, he made up a great point, and he'll discuss it later when we do viewer comments. But maybe let's talk about like nationalism instead of patriotism, right? I think nationalism's probably, I don't want to say it's the better interpretation or translation of that word, but I think it conveys, especially in our climate, a better meaning of what's going on.
Well, to interrupt you real quick, do you think you could talk a little what you mean by the difference between patriotism and nationalism?
Yeah, I mean, it's in my head, I can see the differences, right? So like patriotism, in a sense, at least to me, as it should be, in a pure sense, is to recognize the good things of a country and to be proud to be from that country. And pretty much that's it, right? I mean, to be a patriot would mean, at least as I see it, and I use it as, I live in America. I am proud to be an American.
Or at least you're free.
Yeah. 3 out of 7 days of the week, right?
Yeah.
Whereas nationalism almost implies more of like, it's almost like a superiority where, our country is the standard, our country is better than others. There's this implication that not only are we above others, but that we should go out of our way to show others why they should be more like us. And I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but in my head, that's why I feel like the distinction between the two, where patriotism's used in the English subtitles, which, again, that's a translation, right? That may not even be the most accurate, but when patriotism's used, I don't feel like the nationalism just conveys a stronger sense that I feel like would work better for what we're discussing. And so when Nathan brought that up, I agreed with that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When we look at the Mu Empire, it's not just that they really like being part of the Empire, but it's like, this is the way of life that has to be imposed on everybody. We have to be allowed to live the way we want. Whereas being a patriot means you play football in New England.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good distinction, because there was maybe, I might be cutting, what's the phrase? Being a little too distinctive when they're really close, but thinking about comparing the Mu Empire to Japan, how the sub was only supposed to be used for Japan, making Japan better, but you can give that up. Maybe it's closer to patriotism, whereas the Mu Empire is like, no, everyone has to look like us.
Yeah. See, and I wouldn't agree with that. I would just say, how tightly are you holding on to that nationalism, right? I mean, everyone can repent of anything, but yeah, so I think let's actually get into the film here, because that's a really good distinction. So one of the first things, again, is discussing patriotism and our nationalism, right? I mean, they're kind of interchangeable in the context of the movie, so we'll just keep saying patriotism because that's how the subtitles were, but knowing what we mean.
Sure.
So again, giving a little bit of context, so Ishiro Honda was drafted into the war, right? He had left numerous times. He had a wife and kids. Like, this wasn't just like him being a single dude and going and playing Xbox with his buddies over in the Middle East when they're not doing anything, right? I mean, this is something where he didn't really have a choice, right? So that's where we see the quote, country comes before personal feelings. So that's what patriotism is, you're going to serve your country no matter how you really feel about it, because the nation's best interest matters more than your convictions or your feelings. So we see that coming into the film. We have already, before we even meet Jinguji, is, Admiral Kasumi, right? We have someone who very clearly had been a part of the war, and now he's not. And any mention, any discussion of any of that, there's no interest at all. And it's not that he's necessarily, I don't want to say he's ashamed, like compared to Honda, where Honda didn't really speak much about his time in war at all. Like it's there's not a lot of records of him actually getting into detail about his experiences. Whereas, with Kasumi, you could tell that he felt like he did his duty. He served. But then after the war, he spent the past, at this point, almost 20 years looking and being like, okay, we have to move past this. There's definitely some repentance going on there. So when we meet him, he's adopted Makoto, right? She's under the impression her father died. And as far as Kasumi knows, he is dead. The only thing that he didn't reveal to anyone, and we see the offense that it creates, is that Jinguji revolted from the military, from the Navy, right? He abandoned his post, he left, and that right there is such a big cause. Like, they're having this round table, and he brings that up, and they're all these different Navy leaders are incredibly offended by that.
Right.
And so that's where this nationalism comes in, right? I mean, maybe they weren't as entrenched in it as Jinguji was, but they still have that deep-seated, like, well, why would you revolt? Why would you leave? Like, why would you not serve your country? When, as we found out, he felt like he still was. It was just in a much more extreme way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's definitely something about, like, just in and out groups with that discussion. Like, if you don't have the same exact mindset as us, you can't be part of what we're doing here. And it's not that they didn't have the same mindset. They did essentially agree. He thought he was still serving, but it's a different way. And just to make a brief point, even people we agree with, we can think they disagree when we're saying the same things, just slightly differently. And I mean, welcome to Twitter, but we don't have the might of the military behind that. So
yeah,
it's kind of an interesting little sub point, maybe.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, do you have any more that you want to say about that, or you're taking
Not really. I don't think we have. I don't think there's a lot to that. I was curious to think like the way we have fandom discussions is like, even though we all love the same thing, we all talk about it like slightly differently based on our own experience. So that's where we kind of fall into that trouble.
Yeah.
Because we think we're on different sides, even though we're really not. We're on the exact same side.
Yeah. Okay.
So I wouldn't do that fast enough, but
yeah, Chris is taking off his clothes, and now that we've got a webcam, I'm like, oh, okay, this is different.
I was doing it really, really slow, in depth.
But to add a little context here, because again, that's kind of what we're trying to do here, right? We're not trying to. Oh man, adult burps. So we're not trying to, present ourselves as Japanese scholars or anything, but. Going through and trying to do a little bit of studying here, so many things, like if you actually take the time to look at what was happening, maybe not necessarily in the world here, but, previously, stuff starts making sense, right? So you have the line where they're on the plane and they're trying to figure out, where this base is. And Amano says, Navy secret. And then one of the characters replies, Navy, Japan renounced war in our constitution. And then he goes, you'll see. So what I did is did a little bit of research, and Article 9 of the Constitution of Japan in 1946 is called the Renunciation of War. So, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized. So, over the past few years, that's been adopted and changed, and I feel like it's going to progressively, from what I'm seeing, kind of be absolved. But that's why when we see these films, we see the JSDF, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, rather than like actual military, right? There's never any scenes of the military leaving and going and attacking anyone else. It's all a matter of protection. Which even as a pacifist, I'm like, okay, a giant monster is coming, like, I don't know if I could necessarily argue against trying to defend against that, right? I mean, we're not warring against other human beings.
But the films do.
Yes.
Because we've seen quite frequently that the films have said that that's not enough to even defend against the giant monsters.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that I always say when we talk about pacifism, and not necessarily to each other, since I think we're mostly on the same page, but everything has to be qualified, What about the man who breaks into your house to murder your family? Well, I'm like, okay, the 0 times that's going to happen in my life, I'll worry about it then. But as for now, I think pacifism is the way to go. And the Gojira films as a whole have been, okay, a giant monster is breaking into your home and killing your family. And the films are still going to say, no, that's not enough. So it's interesting to finally see somewhere that goes further than I would be comfortable talking about in public.
Yeah.
Like, these are blockbusters, not as we conceive of the blockbuster today, but still, these are major films, these are major art pieces that argue more forcibly for pacifism than we might. So
yeah, it is surprising to be like, this film is more. So again, I'm gonna quote Nathan here, where Sekizawa is usually the more apolitical author. I'm at screenwriter, and this is his most political screenplay he's done. Granted, Honda has definitely been more involved in that too. But yeah, it's interesting to like this film, what it has to say, and then like, I mean, even contemporary American films, like we were so scared of like actually having any poignancy or depth in our message. It takes Parasite coming over from Korea to have a film that actually has something meaningful. Like, I don't think I've seen more chatter about a large film like that having depth than Parasite. Like, I don't remember really anything else. I mean, granted, people tried to talk up Joker. But so yeah, I mean, so we're seeing here that, Japan had made steps to renounce war, but that was in 1946. We're in 1963 now, right? And it's clear that when we meet Jinguji, that he's not on the same page, right? And part of that is that he hasn't been really involved in the mainland. This is something where, reading through the biography, this is a very real thing where countless people who had served in the military, maybe because of their location, they had no idea what was going on in the world, right? So they came back and they're just like, what's going on? They thought the war was still going on. Maybe they couldn't let go of their patriotism, right? They were just so entrenched in that, where the world had moved on without them. So they're coming back into this, and they don't know how to let go of that way of life. And we see that where, it's he has been living this way for 20 years. So, I mean, first thing, he meets his daughter that he hasn't seen since she was 3. And what does he do? He just brushes her off. Right. He's hardened himself to that point where his servitude to his country matters more than the child he brought into this world. Like, again, that's what I see as nationalism, right? When we care more about a nation than the people who make up that nation. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It's when we fall in love with ideals compared to the people that maybe actually hold those ideals. Like when we talk about fighting for freedom and we fight, just abstract concepts rather than going with people in mind. Like, I fought for your freedom. Well, if you fought for my freedom, then don't I have the freedom to state a dissenting... that's a dumb example, but yeah, absolutely. We fall into these ideologies compared to remembering people. We can fall into these concepts. Yeah, exactly. And brushing off family in support of the nation is just such a, I was going to say beautiful example, but I don't really mean it's a good one, but it's a poignant one, maybe.
Yeah, and it's something that we're seeing now too, where, one of the biggest conversations I feel like in our political landscape is the idea that we have politicians who are more concerned about following a certain person. I'm not just saying Trump, but like in general, they're more willing to follow and subscribe to a party line rather than like, what does bipartisanship really look like, right? Like the fact that, and I'm not saying it's even right, but Joe Biden announced that he would be willing to have a Republican running mate for vice president. And like on paper, I love the thought of that. But like, of course, the Twitter sphere is blowing up. Granted, I'm not even saying I'm not a fan of Joe Biden at all, but like the thought of like a Democrat and Republican working together, like I want that, right? That would make me feel better about how our political landscape is, where we're more concerned about the people that inhabit this nation that we say we love, rather than, well, we need to promote our political ideology at the cost of, not only betraying the people that voted us into this position, but just pursuing our own needs and, how the winds blow, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think, you can run this problem where we can be accused of centrism by saying that a bipartisan ticket is really just about the status quo when there are real problems that needed to be fixed. But it's also, when you vote, you can just click like one button and it says all of the Republican, like you only need to hit one thing for it to read one party line. So we've made it easy to entrench ourselves like this. And we're not living apart from the mainland, like you had pointed out, but we are metaphorically, and we love our metaphors and our analogies.
Oh, Britta.
So
You know exactly what I'm thinking.
That one, didn't I?
No, it's just, what was, didn't she have like a analogy about owls or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
I can't stop thinking the school might be in trouble because of this bridge collapsing guy.
He's the one making bad bridges. That's like me blaming owls for how much I suck at analogies.
I was thinking about the quote when it's like, I can excuse racism, but I draw the line at animal cruelty. You can excuse what?
Yeah, no, it's, we're referencing Community, by the way. If you've never watched that show, it's a good one.
Our 2020 resolution is to add more Community references to the show.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. So yeah, I mean, we get into that, but so here's the thing though, and the one thing I really try to challenge myself in watching this film is trying to sympathize with the ideologies and the viewpoints that I wouldn't have agreed with, right? And even Honda said that about this film, where I'm kind of jumping ahead, but he talks about Jinguji, where he's like, he would have restarted the war, right? That was kind of his mentality, is like, well, the world has changed. He's like, well, I can change it back, or however he says that. But so Honda says, you know, he would have restarted the war, so I could not express my film through his viewpoint, but I understood his feelings, his thoughts, and how he talked, right? So he identified with Admiral Kasumi, or sorry, I shouldn't call him Admiral, because that's opening a wound, I think is touching an old scar. That's what he said. But he empathized with Jinguji as well. So I try to sympathize with that, where he felt like he was serving his nation. And again, a lot of people who were drafted into the military after years, they had to kind of convince themselves that, right?
What's the alternative?
Yeah. It's so, you know, I sympathize because he left his daughter behind. So did he ever plan on seeing his daughter again? Probably not. So he's hardened himself, right? He's steeled himself up. So then he finally sees her. But what does he do? He wasn't planning for this, right? No one told him that this was going to be happening. You know, it's 17 years of bitterness and all this pain that he's bottled up. And all of a sudden now he's supposed to just let go in 5 minutes. I mean, I can't really, like, as callous as it is, I can also understand how he got to that point, right? Because what I see here is that he is symbolic of someone where the war is ended, but like the war isn't actually over, right? So for him, I mean, you know, so I think, you know, my dad was in the Air Force for a while, and he was never in active combat or anything like that. But I mean, every time he came home from being gone for a year, I mean, I always knew he was going to leave again, right? Like I always knew this wasn't permanent until he retired. And to a certain capacity, like I can't even imagine serving in the military in any capacity, especially World War II. You come home and you don't feel like you can leave it behind, right? You know, you're trying to be a part of a family, and the war just never ends. So in Honda's biography, his wife talks about that, where she says that, you know, he was still awakened by horrible nightmares 2 or 3 times each year. He'd see all of his friends in his dreams, all of those who died fighting, all standing in a line. The horror of war was with him until he died, right? And I mean, just what's amazing to me is I look at that and all I can think of is PTSD. But I mean, that was something that wasn't even diagnosed until the Vietnam War, right? At least not like solidified. So, you know, I pulled up it was a New York Times article, I think. It was a lady named Sally Settle in 2006, where she was talking about, you know, according to a report from its Inspector General, the Department of Veteran Affairs is paying compensation for post-traumatic stress disorder to nearly twice as many veterans as 6 years ago at an annual cost of $4.3 billion. That's mind-blowing to me. So that's diagnosed. So think about what was going on at this point, right? So again, was it his nationalism? I can't sympathize with in the degree of like agreeing with it, but his hardness, all this stuff, this callousness that he has, I can sympathize with, because and I don't know. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, and I think I'm kind of trying to draw a few ideas together, so maybe I need a little help bridging that. But when you talk about being drafted into the war and you have to adopt the wartime ideology rather than it being your own, because I guess I would imagine that most people who actually bought into the rhetoric of war would have joined up themselves. So a lot of people who have to be drafted have to adopt that mentality. So what happens when a war ends? You've bought into a new ideology, or you have not found sufficient end goals for the ideology you came into the war with. So it's hard to let go. Plus, just the trauma of going through battles. It's really foreign to us, especially people our age, because we think the war on terror has been going on since I was 6, right? I mean, we don't know what it's like for a war to end, so we don't know what it's like to have to give up those wartime ideologies, but we also know what it's like to fight a war with a kind of a moving goalposts, and who knows how many of these soldiers might have had similarly moving goalposts, or their goalposts were a lot further out, and then to have not met any goals, but they've lost the war. Like, that's such a foreign concept to me, to probably a lot of people today. So it makes it very easy to sympathize. But it's, I think, a little bit of that foreignness of that ideology that makes it hard to completely be compassionate toward, just because I don't have any frame of reference for it.
Yeah.
But I think the film... And I don't think this is just us being like good Christians to read some sort of sympathy toward this character. Kind of what you said. The film is not. This film itself is somewhat sympathetic towards it.
Yeah, the film is designed to be that way, though, because I think what Honda is great at, and I think our current political discourse is absolutely horrible at, is Honda humanizes his characters, right? I mean, that's the whole... Not the whole, but that's such a huge part of the Christian message, is that, we look at the story of the prodigal son, right? Which really, it should be the story of the prodigal son's brother, because he's the one that we should relate to, right? He's the one we identify with. We are lost, but now we're found. But that's not where the story ends. The story ends with the brother who was like, I never left. Why am I not getting this treatment, right? Why is my brother who squanders everything? Why is my brother who deserves nothing? Why does he receive this and I don't? So I look at these films and I think, and I just really look at anything and I'm like, we see people that, we not only don't agree with, but are doing things that are absolutely unethical, or, we might say deplorable, right?
Yeah.
But are those people deserving to be dehumanized? And the Christian message is no, they're not.
Well, and I think if I can stay on that theme for a minute, and bring up the... Oh, thanks. You bring up the prodigal son. I kind of like... There's a couple of different dimensions of Jonah in the movie. And of course, there's water. There's water monsters. But this concept of like... and I think it's important that we get back to the water monster, but like in the meantime, like the story of the prodigal son leaves this invitation for the hearers to be like, if you're the older brother, what are you going to do? Are you going to join the party that the father throws for the son, or are you going to stay outside and be pissed? Just the same that Jonah had to decide, is he going to obey God, go to Nineveh and preach a message of repentance, or is he going to let these people suffer? And it's kind of the same with the Mu Empire. They are Nineveh 50 years later during Nahum when they're destroyed, to the point where the Empress goes back to be destroyed with the Empire, right? But then there's the invitation for all of the other Japanese characters to leave that nationalism behind and join this kind of greater good, the repentance that you had been bringing up. So just as Jonah makes this decision first to run away, then he realizes, no, I gotta go. I've got to go in obedience, and he gives them the chance to repent. Like this movie gives us now in 2019, but probably the original audience in 63 and early 64 to say, what are you still holding on to this nationalism? Can you let go of it? Because you see what happens when we hold on to it. We become just like the Mu Empire. We're going to be destroyed. Can you give up your Like, it's almost asking, can you give up this nationalism, not your hopes and dreams, but this specific toxic ideology to serve the greater good of Japan and the greater good of humanity, really?
Yeah, and I think that's huge, though. I mean, that's part of this debate between Jinguji and Kasumi is, you call patriotism nonsense, take a global point of view. And then he's like, I'll devote my life to my country, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where, the 40s Japan was very ethnocentric, focusing solely on the state, so to speak. The Japan we see now is, well, we need Atragon to save the world. Right. And we're going to see that theme actually in the next film as well, the brotherhood of humanity and what that means. So that's this repentance. So I think that's a really big thing where, Kasumi, that's when he's referred to as Admiral. He says, drop the Admiral. You're touching an old scar. So Jinguji's amazed that Kasumi doesn't want to identify with that, right? But he's left it behind. He's had time to think about what the war did and how that's not the way that they want to proceed anymore. The Atragon should truly be for the protection of all people, not just for Japan. And the thing is, what's interesting is you're right. Like the UN took a minute to actually do something, but like Japan really did want to be like, hey, like we want to help, they weren't the ones waiting to do anything. Right. So you can see there's kind of a shift here in the way that they even have their worldview, right? There is some kind of change happening, but the problem is, what you're talking about, even the call of who, are you going to partake in this party? We're not party here, but are you going to partake in this worldview change? Because the problem is there were still people at this time that would have been sympathetic to this nationalism because, right-wing extremism was still very present in the 60s, where it was a push to, and I quote, liberate the Asian people from the Western powers and to justify previous actions done before, right? So yeah, I mean, that was a very real thing. And I think having a character that did display those tendencies, but showing that change, I think that was very impactful because we live in a society that we expect people to change, but we almost don't allow it, right? It's weird. Like we expect change, but we don't allow it. So this was a story where we actually did get to see that happen. But I kind of want to focus right here though on Makoto though. So one of the things I kind of want to touch on before we get to the rest of the film, because that's what I love about this film is it's so simplistic, but it's so complex, right? So one of the quotes, and God, so like, I think Steve Rifle brought it up where this movie has one of the most well acted out scenes that we've seen since Gojira, where it's Makoto and her father on the beach talking, and she, says, I shouldn't have come. I was happier dreaming of you. And I sat there and I'm like, and I'm getting emotional being a dad, right? But I'm like, how many kids have thought the same thing about the dads that they never knew? Like meeting him for the first time, she's battered, she's bruised, and then she asks, do you understand how a child feels? Orphaned by war. So of course he tries to say he does, but then she's like, well, if you did, you would work for world good. Your way of thinking is like the people of Mu, and I hate you for it. So the challenge here, and I think what he sees is, what good is patriotism if others have to suffer in your wake?
Yeah, I love that line that's like, if you truly understood, you'd realize that it's not worth making more people like me. And we see that nationalism's end is total destruction in the worldview of this movie.
Yeah.
So it's not even just the orphanage of the next generation, but it's really the end of humanity.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something where I think conversations about war tend to be glossed over because it's very focused on how I'm or my neighbors are inconvenienced, right? So we don't think about how when we lay waste to just even the most remote village in the Middle East, right? You are now disrupting their economy. You're disrupting their religious life. You're disrupting, their fabric of their communities. People who wanted nothing to do with this war are now being torn asunder. Like you have created orphans. There's a multitude of things here where we don't think about that, right? So you're exactly right, where it's not just, you've created your daughter to be an orphan to a certain degree, but like your mindset, if you keep proceeding this way, there's going to be more of me out there because you don't know how to stop. Right. And that's where, the quote is like, you're a ghost wearing a rusty armor named Patriotism. Like, on the one hand, it's kind of clunky the way it was worded, but like, I think that was I love the idea that like you're dead and you don't even realize it. Like, isn't that a trope about ghosts though, that like they don't realize that they're dead and they keep trying to proceed life the same way? And I think to me, that's what it's saying. It's like your way of thinking is dead, but you haven't made peace with it yet. And until you make peace, you will continue to be this ghost. And what happens? He takes off the armor, and what does he say? I feel fine. Like the world still revolves. And I wouldn't say it's a cheaply earned character development, because obviously we don't have time for that, but it felt sincere.
Well, and I guess that's kind of the moral world of movies compared to TV shows or, gasp real life, that we don't have time to see the entirety of it be earned, but we can still get excited when it is earned. And on further retrospection, it's a little cheap. It's a little quick, but just the joy that we get as a viewer of seeing that being let go, of him entering the correct worldview that the movie espouses, it's such a relief even.
Yeah, because there is some tension, right? He doesn't immediately change. The base gets bombed. His daughter gets kidnapped. He goes to get her, right? But at that point, and this is probably one of my favorite parts, is like he offers up a chance for peace talks, right? So they have the Empress of Mu on the Atragon. I almost called it the Gotengo because that's what I know it from a later movie. But so she's on there and he offers up the chance to make peace and she wants nothing to do with it. He's like, all right, fine. Then it's war. Like he's not fully changed, right? Like it's kind of this, you see glimpses, but to me, that's actually why I feel like it feels rushed, but it almost feels more sincere because it's like he hasn't fully embraced it yet, right? But he does, understand like, she rushes off to try to, return to her people, and he lets her go. And he's like, she knows she'll die, but she's returning. Just let her go. Because I think, and this is probably the most effective ending in a film I've seen in so long. And I've seen this movie multiple times, right? But it's the thought for him, for Jinguji to say that, it's haunting because her pride for her country, she would rather die with it than live a new life. And that was the road he was going down himself. Like he saw himself in her and he's like, she's not going to change. Just let her go.
Right. And I think that's where, since we're still on the Star Wars spoiler train, you compare like Ben Solo and Emperor Palpatine, like, they both die at the end of episode 9. I've already warned you about spoilers. So, but like Ben can change, but Palpatine can't. And I think part of us wants to say, wait, that doesn't seem fair. Why can one change and the other can't? But maybe Rise of Skywalker and this one both say like they can't change and inhabit the same worldview. If you cannot let go of this ancient worldview, if you cannot let go of this destructive one, there's no change, there's no fixing it. You're on the same path. So I love how it doesn't seem like the best. Like, we wish that he would have stopped her. We wish that they would have spent the rest of their life trying to change her mind. But she's made her decision, and I think in this fiction of the movie, because this isn't real life, in real life we don't really want to ever give up on anyone, but in the fiction of the movie, we say, okay, she can't, if she's not going to adopt a new worldview, she cannot continue to, she won't change. So there's real ramifications there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great part about, well, I say great, but the interesting part about all of that is even when they're in Mu and they're trying to escape, right? Like they choose to bring her with them, like not under the pretense that she's going to change, but like that's the right thing to do. And to me, I think it's a testament that you can do kind and charitable things to people, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to change, but like that's not why we do it, right? We do it because, or at least, you know, for you and myself and anyone else who can relate, as Christians, we're called to love, right? You know, we're not called to change people. We're not called to only love people if they do change. We're just called to love and to be compassionate and to rehumanize them when they have been dehumanized. So yeah, it was sad to see her go, right? Like you're just kind of hoping, but then you think about it, if the civilization's been around for so long, if we're going back to Palpatine's this old crone, right? His heart's been hardened so far where it's dang near impossible to crack it open, right? And that's probably the same with her. Like you see glimpses of it, but I mean, if she's probably as old as the movie makes her out to be, then she's had years of that bitterness towards the world where, you know, these moments of compassion, you can see it on her face that she's like, I don't know what this is like. What is this? But it just wasn't enough. And but I just, before we kind of get back on just some overall thoughts, because we're actually doing pretty well on time. You know, the biography on Honda talks a little bit about Atragon and mentions that whereas Jinguji is the warning to like keep an eye on nationalism that might rear its head again, right? The Mu Empire is a fascist mirror of Imperial Japan, an ancient civilization with modern weaponry and science, blindly convinced of its own superiority and unwilling to negotiate even when facing catastrophic defeat. And it's like, I mean, that's where I look at this film and I'm like, you're what we were saying before, he didn't hold any punches at all. Like the fact that a film like this could be made at that time, I mean, you know, that's like trying to make a film on 9/11, but actually address the fact that like we brought it on ourselves right now. Like that would not go over well at all.
Right. There's a huge level of self-reflection and national reflection that goes on in these films that there would be no way we could address today, I think, without devolving into just a flaming trash fire.
Yeah.
And
I should clarify, I don't mean that like the people who died in 9/11, like they brought that on themselves. I'm sure someone might hear that and take it that way. But I think that's what I'm getting as the complexity of war, where very rarely when it comes to situations like this are there innocent parties, right? Now, the victims are largely innocent, right? But it's the people who are actually guilty, the government officials and everyone else, those aren't the ones who ever suffer. And that's the thing I struggle with war, right? You have the soldiers going out and fighting, you have the civilians who die, but look at the people who are actually pulling the strings. What happens to them, right? They're the ones who get their nations into war, and yet largely they remain unscathed, at least by the events themselves.
Yeah, and I think, you know, talking about war, talking about just the concept of military ideologies, it's so complex, and of course we're not going to do that very well in an hour. So we'd love to continue this discussion on Twitter, maybe in DMs where we'd have a little more space to have complex and nuanced conversations, but we're also willing to say we're right. But I think what we want to say is, like, with 9/11, you can't just say that it happened, like there wasn't just an event. You have to look at the whole geopolitical structures that inhabited the 80s and the 90s, Iran-Contra, the Gulf War. I mean, it wasn't just in 2001 something happened. Like, there was decades of conflicts that built up to this. So I think what we're trying to say is we'll never see a movie where that's going to address all of that political buildup in a nuanced and maybe honest way. We're not, I mean, whatever we might say in an hour, clearly it's not cover that breadth. But
Yeah.
what we can do in these 2-hour films is actually address some of that. And creating a world of fiction like this lets us turn the mirror to ourselves and lets Honda put the mirror to Japan in a way that says, like, hey, these are fake people. I've kind of sped up certain processes. I've flattened certain processes, but we're still going to take a deep, hard look at ourselves. And hopefully in seeing other people do this, we can say, hey, I don't like that. And then when that gets turned back on us or on the original viewers, we can say, oh, shoot, that's us. I mean, I watched this movie. I didn't like that there. I didn't realize that was me. I didn't realize I myself was doing that. So
Yeah.
that's the beauty of, I think, fiction like this.
Yep, absolutely. So I just had some kind of random thoughts. I don't know if you had any you wanted to share.
Yeah, I have probably about 2 more.
Yeah.
So once you do yours, I can.
Yeah, I'm just going to
Lay mine
kind of
out.
shoot these off here. So first of all,
Okay.
after Gamera Pooper Monster, it was nice to hear Ifukube again. I will say, watching this for the 3rd time now, I think, the first time I watched it, Kenji Sahara's character, like, you know, he immediately inserts himself into the character, you know, all bundled up in his coat. And, like, it's a nice red herring of, like, oh, you think it's super obvious he can't be one of them, but, like, he ends up being it. So I felt like that was a good convincing, like, is he not, without it being annoying. I didn't even recognize that was him until I watched it this most recent time. Now that I've watched, you know, all these other films with him in there, I'm like, oh, it's the facial hair. Okay. I think my one of my favorite lines was when they get the package and the scientist is like, it may be a bomb. Let me open it. And I'm like, what are you, an explosive scientist? Like, come on.
What were you going to do?
And he didn't even do anything special. It was just whatever.
He was just going to be the one that exploded.
Yeah. So with the Mu Empire, like, I love the mythology behind it, right? Is the idea that they ruled the entire world and all these legends and myths go back to them. Like, that was cool. I wish we would see more of that. I'll just be honest, we don't in any of these films. And even though Subarai and everyone else weren't very happy with the budget and getting everything done in time, I thought the miniature work was great in this film, especially, you know, the underwater empire. We hadn't really seen that before, so that was cool. And I think really the last random thought I had was that when you see, I don't know, the thing I'm struggling with in this film is what took the Mu Empire so long to do this, right? And I think part of it is that they're starting to have issues with these cave-ins, right? So that's why they kidnapped those scientists, because they were cave-in specialists, which is interesting. I'm like, such a niche field. But
PhD work.
yeah, so like on the one hand, like I want to be sympathetic to them, right? I'm like, oh man, like your whole civilization's about to crumble. That sucks. But then I'm like, oh wait, you enslave people to get what you want, right? You're drafting people into your army without their choice. So then I'm like,
And that should be itself a bunch of red flags. Alerts to be like, hey, drafting. What does that have to do with enslaving? And
Yeah.
just even the, yeah.
yeah. So that's where, you know, thinking about like what took them so long, that was kind of something in the back of my head. But yeah, that whole thing there makes it hard to sympathize with them. And I think Honda does that on purpose, right? He doesn't want to give you any reasons to sympathize with them. Not that they're irredeemable, but just that it's very clear this is not the right path to go down.
Even the cave-ins, I feel like you might have been sympathetic as a Christian, but it's not like the film really wanted us to be looking for that too much.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, oh no, cave-ins. We would be like, why don't they just move?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny you bring up the soundtrack, because I think I just got the Gamera anthem out of my head a day or two ago after hearing it 4 times in the same movie in its entirety. But yeah, so my 2 quick thoughts was, in this one I thought it was pretty interesting. Well, I have 2 thoughts on the movie and then 1 thought on this episode. The first thought is that it's interesting that we've seen now if you want to call the submarine a weapon, this is now one of the weapons that the movie talks about more positively than any of the other ones we've seen before. There was such a there's both a moral and a mortal cost to the oxygen destroyer that not only was the central moral conundrum of the movie is, well, should we use it or not, but to use it took self-sacrifice. It took death, not just the death of Godzilla or what we thought was his death, but the death of the creator. And now we're seeing the Atragon is kind of held in high regard. It's something everyone wants. There's no real question about using it. It's just for whom will it be used. So I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. And just thinking too, my second thought is, we've talked before about beasts rising out of the sea and how in both Jewish and Christian mythology, the sea is representative of chaos. You see in Daniel, you see in Revelation that beasts come out of the sea and they're evil because God's people are symbolized by land, and the chaos that inhabits the world is symbolized by the sea. And it used to be that just monsters were coming out of the sea. But even a little with Gamera last week, and I know we're jumping out of order, but now we're seeing people come out of the sea, and people being the cause of this chaos, where it used to be Godzilla, used to be this nuclear radiated animal, and now it's people are causing this chaos. So it's just like Matango had this question of who's the real monster, the mushroom men, but who are the mushroom men? It's people. Now we're seeing again that the worst monster is again the people.
Yeah.
And so that brings me to my meta comment on this episode, which is a meta commentary on the series, that we've talked about the monster, but really more in passing than anything else.
Absolutely.
And I think that's such an amazing bit about this film, is that the least interesting part is the most fantastical part.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's tough too, is I was thinking about who we should pour one out for, and I'm well, there weren't even really any remarkable deaths, so I'm kind of maybe Manda, just the fact that he's frozen down there and left alone. I'm I would pour one out to that. That sucks.
Yeah, I did notice that the casualty count was a lot lower.
Yeah. I think there was a school bus that got destroyed, so that sucks. But
yeah.
Are you ready for questions and comments?
I'm so ready.
Yeah. Oh,
maybe even a concern or two.
yeah. Well, so actually, let's go ahead. I don't know. I've been thinking about it, and let's have this discussion. So I've been thankful that we're not a podcast where we actually review films and rate them, right? So I kind of want to not do that anymore. How do you feel about that?
I think I'm good with that.
Okay, cool.
It becomes so not just arbitrary, but it's so reductive of what the movies are and what they stand for, that we could get a really crappy movie that makes a great point, or we can get a great movie that has no point. And I don't want to reduce that too badly.
Yeah. So what I will say is we did get a question about the ratings. That's kind of what got my
Sure.
thoughts going down there. So I'm trying to pull up who asked that. So give me 1 second. Okay, so I have Young Goji asked, what would you rate Manda on a scale of 1 to 10? Not the movie, just the monster.
I feel bad, so I'm going to repeat myself, because I think it's important, if we're going to rate the monster, that Manda was the least interesting bit about this movie. I don't know. I mean, would I be curious to see it again? Absolutely. But right now it didn't leave a huge impression on me.
I love the design. It has that feeling of a dragon. We haven't really had that yet. So I'm on board with that. I saw someone make some passing comment about it being the year of the dragon or something. And I'm I don't know. I didn't look into that too far, but I mean, as a whole, I would give monster design a 7. It's unique. We haven't really seen it before, but doesn't really do a whole lot. So it's kind of,
Whatever I would think about its design, it's more in the potential than it is in the actualization, because for the most part we've seen mutated dinosaurs and mutated animals, and this is the first one that, whether or not you believe dragons were real, they used to be dinosaurs, whatever, this one is like kind of a straight Eastern dragon design. It looks like, if I can be just kind of crude about it, it looks like a realistic Shenron from Dragon Ball Z. It's got the same kind of arm structure. I see you're rolling your eyes. It's got the same
so really horns. Shenron is Manda.
Well, I guess in a technical linear time and space, yes. Yeah. You would be correct. But there's something that's so interesting that's hinted at by it being such an Eastern mythological design and not an animal, but this isn't the movie to explore that design or that history, unfortunately. So I would give its potential like an 7 or 8, but in terms of its actualization, not a ton.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we can you, like, without spoiling much, are we going to see it again?
A very small handful of times, but yeah.
Okay. So it's not completely done, but
no. Okay, so also on Instagram, we had someone, Gojira26 Noir, asked, if there is an aspect of the film you would change, what would it be? For me, I'm not saying it's a perfect film, but I'm also just kind of like, I really got nothing. That ending's really good. Maybe, I don't know, part of the beginning feels a little clunky with the model. I don't know. It's just kind of like, it's not bad. I love the part where it's like, I never said like she needed to pose nude or whatever it was. It's just kind of the humor there was fine. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything where I'd be like, I want this to be different.
I wonder if there's a way that the threat of the movie, like instead of a video of the history of the movie, could the threat have been presented a little more differently? Because if you had sent, like, if anyone sends me a DVD and it says, I'm about to take over the planet, I'd be like, sweet, is this coming to Netflix or Hulu? Like, I could write that off pretty easily. So it would have been interesting to see the movie be a more tangible threat that the UN still ignored. But
so there we go. That's I'm gonna piggyback on that. Like that whole trope of like the villains always have like, what is it, Adobe Premiere or something that they can come up with these videos. Right. And I'm like, man, come on. Like, yeah, so I agree with you there. It's just like, how did you get these camera angles? Like, it's incredible.
It's like amazing that the Mu Empire hires a cinematographer to use iMovie to create their threats.
But I mean, they're using iPhone 11, so it's great video quality.
Looks so real.
So Nathan Marchand of the Monster Island Film Vault shared a comment and a question. So he said, I simply adore this film. It's a testament not only to Honda as a director, but Shinichi Sekizawa as a screenwriter. It's the most political story he ever wrote, so far as I know, which isn't typical of this apolitical man, which we addressed earlier. Mm-hmm. This film is steeped in Japanese history and then current events with war stragglers. War guilt, Article 9, and nationalism are all tackled in one form and another. Although subtitles say patriotism, I think nationalism is a better word. Again, indebted to you, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you.
All of this is a very Japanese Jules Vernean sci-fi adventure film. I love it. So here's my question. Do you think Jinguji's turn at the end of the film was genuine, or was it motivated only by his daughter's kidnapping? Why? To me, I don't see the two as being mutually exclusive.
No, me neither.
So, I mean, yeah, that may have been the catalyst, but sometimes that's what it takes to, like, get your crap together, right?
Right, and I think that's the thing about ideologies. Oh, my shizek just came out. That's the thing with ideologies in general, is that they don't just change overnight. Otherwise, they wouldn't be ideologies. They would just be, like, thoughts or ideas. Sometimes we need that kind of, like, this might be the wrong word, but sometimes we need traumas like that to break us out of our ideologies. We need some sort of catastrophic shift in our lives to change our minds, because ideologies are those things that just rarely go unchallenged. And you just bringing up a really good tweet does not challenge my thought process that much. But you stealing my daughter will probably be a pretty good reason to reconsider what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, to take your social media point there, though, I see that all the time. Like, Facebook doesn't change people's minds, right? That was like the mantra for the longest time. But the thing is, a single post won't, but a conversation will.
Yeah.
Right. So I just think in that, all that said, like, being talked at in all of these different situations for Jinguji, like, it wasn't enough. But then, like, when his daughter gets kidnapped, like, I think that was him realizing, like, okay, like, this is really happening. I don't know. There's so many different factors. So yeah, I don't think the two have to be mutually exclusive.
Well, her kidnapping really is a tangible example of what she had said. Like, your warmongering, these are my words, like, your warmongering is going to put all of us in danger. It's going to create all of these orphans. Yep. And it is warmongering that later does endanger her. So if she's not just saying, like, from a ivory tower, we're in danger if you hold on to this ideology, she's, like, actually in danger from the ideology. So it's not just that he's heard it, but now he's seeing the fruits of it come to bear. So
yep. Okay. And then last question comes from Michael Hamilton. So he had sent this question. Well, he sent 3 questions. So I was like, dude, I don't know how many I can do. So I chose one out of the 3. So he said,
it's not like we're throwing the other 2 away. So
no, I'm throwing them away.
Oh, okay.
Just kidding.
Thanks, Michael.
So no, the other 2 we kind of already addressed.
Sure.
So this one here, he said, how would you rank the messaging in Atragon in terms of importance among the other Toho films of that time period? Which I thought was a great question. I don't know if I can do importance, right? Same way the rating and ranking is always hard for me. But I would say at that point, that was the kind of conversation that needed to happen, right? So as we've already talked about, this right-wing extremism was very present already. Maybe not as mainstream as it could have been, but it was still there. Pamphlets were going out, people going out and doing their evangelizing, right? So this is Honda's way of, like, guys, gals, remember what we came from, right? Like, the one thing I love about Honda is he's a very confessional director where, yes, he captures the atrocity of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but there's also this element of, like, the emperor could have ended the war, right? And not necessarily the civilians' fault, but there is a sense of this nationalism led to that extreme. So did anyone force the United States to drop the bombs? No. No one did. They, government made that decision on their own, but could have Japan made different decisions to stop the fighting before that point? Absolutely. So that's, again, it's that confessional sense in Honda that we get in this film of someone who served in the war, he did his time, he's realized the horrors of war. We know what it's like to be there. Let's not go back. Let's remember. Let's look in the face of what nationalism really is. Let's not return.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking too that we've seen other American movies kind of take some of the same ideas that we've seen in previous Gojira films. If you think about even the first Pokemon movie, some of the symbolism behind Mewtwo has the same symbolism behind Godzilla, like this creature that we've created with too much power and now it's turned on us. And Pokemon makes the point far less directly as Gojira does. But this is an interesting one because I can't think of a film, maybe the current Watchmen TV series, that has the same thematic messaging. But I can't think of one right now that we might need to hear more with the problems of white nationalism, with our own far-right problems, with people whose entire ideological base on Twitter is talking about not even just like the spreading of Western culture, but like the necessity to imperialize Western culture. Like, it's hard to see a movie that would be... We need this message today. I can't speak to the 60s because I didn't live in Japan in the 60s. I didn't live anywhere in the 60s, but I can say for today's American political climate, it's just as important, probably. Maybe adapted a little, but there's still so much that it would say to us.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it, where at this time I think I can't really speak for anyone, but I feel like maybe the shadow of the bombs had lifted, right? But not so much the reality that war could happen at any time. I mean, that's a very real thing. So that's why I feel like, at least in this point, it's a very important film for them to have made. Was it the most important? I don't know if I can say that, but it was definitely up there, where I think that's why we're kind of seeing a trend going away from Godzilla being symbolic of nuclear warfare, which is obviously still a very real threat, but now Honda's realizing there's other things in the world that need to be addressed as well. He doesn't want to keep banging the same drum. So
Right.
But yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to end, don't you, Chris?
The only thing that I might say is, do you want to talk about the Patreon at all? Even just briefly?
Yeah, so we did actually, no, not about the Patreon. So At this point, if you're listening to the podcast, there's still going to be a few days left of a giveaway that we're doing as a way of saying thank you for getting us to 1,000 downloads in a incredibly short amount of time.
So short. So
on Twitter and Instagram, there's a chance for you to win on both, which if you do win both, that's not going to happen. Not going to let that happen. But the point is, there is a giveaway going on. We are doing giving away signed copies of David Callett's book on the Godzilla films. He has graciously agreed to sign those for us. And then once the drawings happen, we'll go ahead and send them to you. So the rules for that are on Instagram and Twitter. By this point, I don't know when it's actually going to start, because we're not quite there. We're like 100 downloads away. But by the time this comes out, we will be there. So make sure to check that out. And then, yeah, we did make a quick adjustment to the Patreon page. We changed our tiers from 1, 5, and 10 to 1, 3, and 5. At the end of the day, it just felt weird asking for the amount of a Netflix subscription. So we're like, hey, we're still going to do this, but we're trying to be a little bit more budget minded, because while we appreciate the support, we also know that like $10 adds up pretty quick. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Kaiju Apostle Podcast. If you liked what you heard, don't be a stranger. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Kaiju Apostle Pod. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, you can subscribe to our show on your favorite podcasting platform, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google. Lastly, we do have a Patreon page where we have some great perks, including early access to the episodes, show notes, and the ability to have your voice recordings featured on the show. Again, we appreciate the support, and we look forward to hearing from you.